All right, let's do this. Hey everyone, I'm Christy Verbrugge-Post, and this is the Post Production Podcast, a space for women who are building businesses, rediscovering themselves, or simply trying to figure out what comes next. We talk about the unpolished stuff here, the self-doubt, the in-betweens, the is this even a real business moments, especially when you're starting over somewhere new, right? Or building something that doesn't quite fit the traditional mold. And today, this is a big one. We're talking about something I know a lot of women, including myself, wrestle with, whether we say it out loud or not. And that is, can I really charge for that? You know, the things that come naturally to you, the things you've always done freely or instinctively, the soft skills, the behind-the-scenes magic, the emotional labor, the organizing, encouraging, simplifying, soothing, uplifting. Is that really something people pay for? Well, let's talk about it. So if you're ready, grab yourself a cup of coffee or your favorite cup of something, and let's dive deep. Before we talk about pricing and offers and all of the things, I'd like to take a small step back and look at where some of these beliefs around work and worth might come from. Because for many of us, the messages we received about value weren't just personal, but they were also generational. Women in our grandmothers and even our mothers' generations often didn't expect recognition. They were taught to be reliable, not visible. They showed up to work, most of the time while raising families, and were proud to do their job well and quietly. Because for many of them, doing the job at all was the achievement. The idea of asking for more, either more money, more visibility, more credit, was often frowned upon, and to a large degree still is. It seems greedy, ungrateful, or like rocking the boat. Even in professional salaried roles like the public service or teaching or healthcare, the mindset was often, I don't need a pat on the back, I just need to do my job. And I get it. That belief comes from a different time, a different set of norms, where economic survival was the priority and asking for more wasn't always safe or indeed possible. But what happens when we carry that mindset into a new generation, into entrepreneurship? What happens when we've been raised to be competent and dependable, but now we're also trying to set prices, advocate for our work, and say, yes, this is worth something? It gets complicated, right? So if you've ever felt hesitant to charge for something that comes naturally to you, it's not a personal flaw. It's part of the air that so many of us have been breathing for decades. And of course, even as we reflect on where those messages came from, we also need to consider where we are now and the context we're speaking from. While we're talking about value, pricing, and being paid what we're worth, I want to pause and acknowledge something important. And that's that I speak about these things from a place of immense privilege, because I know deeply that not everyone has the same freedom to set prices or even start a business, let alone ask for more. Living in the UAE, we're often surrounded by stories of both great opportunity and great disparity, side by side. Some people are earning what would be considered extremely high salaries by global standards, and others are working hard for wages that wouldn't even come close to covering basic expenses for a place like Canada, let's say. So when I talk about owning your worth, I really don't say that lightly. I say it knowing that this conversation exists in a layered, nuanced place, and that financial empowerment is not a level playing field. And maybe that's all the more reason that we should talk about it. We should talk about it with care and with honesty, but most certainly without shame. Because recognizing your worth doesn't mean ignoring the bigger picture, but for me, it means showing up with empathy and doing my part from wherever I stand. Now, I can't count how many times I've sat with women, either in person or online, in coffee shops, DMs, who tell me things like, I'm just good at helping people, or I've always loved making things, or I've been the one people come to when, or I'm the one people come to when they feel stuck. And I usually can't help myself but to try, as gently but firmly as possible, to pause them and say, please don't minimize what you're capable of. What you're describing sounds like value, and it might seem like a no-brainer to you, but to someone else, your skill set is exactly what they need, and they may very well feel like they've struck a gold mine. I'm saying it for them, but I'm also saying it for myself because, spoiler alert, I have these thoughts all the time. But because what we're good at doesn't necessarily come with a certificate or a before and after photo or an obvious deliverable, we downplay it, especially women, especially those of us who've been raised to be helpful, to be generous, to do it all without asking for anything in return, to be altruistic, to be a good team player. An integral piece of Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's book, is how women often hold back because we're afraid of being labeled ambitious in the wrong way. It's like we've been trained to believe that asking for fair recognition or payment somehow undoes the goodness of the work itself. But I want us to start to seriously challenge that idea that's been ingrained in so much of women's DNA. Here's a nugget of truth that I feel goes unsaid far too often. Just because something comes naturally to you does not mean that it is not worth charging for. In fact, those are often the most valuable things, the things that we've honed over a lifetime of showing up and sitting against the wall behind those who are at the table, listening closely and quietly, paying attention to people's needs, then heading straight to work, cracking those eggs and making those omelets like it's nobody's business. But because we can't see these skills, these gifts of ours, because they're not something that are frameable like a university degree, we assume that they're not real business assets, when in actuality, they absolutely are. In my old job, many of these so-called soft skills are essential qualifications for a job. You must demonstrate that you possess these abilities in order to be considered for a position. It's not about whether you can see or feel or touch these attributes and skills, but more about how you use them to make yourself and others feel. How you can use them to make yours or a company or someone else's life a little easier. I often say to clients, if you wouldn't hesitate to pay a web designer to make your site look beautiful, why would you hesitate to charge someone for the way you make their life feel more navigable or possible? I'm not talking about asking you to inflate your sense of self-worth here. I'm just asking you to flat out recognize it. And once you're done that, do it again, please. This time without apology. And listen, this takes some practice. It might feel clunky at first. Heck, it's still clunky for me at times. Actually, all the time. But just because it's uncomfortable does not mean that it's wrong. So this week and next week and the week after that, when someone thanks you for something that you did or something that you just are, please try not to brush it off. Don't downplay it. Instead, let it land. However uncomfortable it is, sit with the idea that your ease might be someone else's breakthrough, that the work that you do in the shadows or loud and proud, and everything that goes with it, the emotional labor and the perspective shifting and the listening, is more than nice. Sometimes, to some people, even to you, it's necessary. And you don't have to shout about it. That's what your happy clients and friends are there for. But you do have to stop pretending that it's nothing. When women are stuck figuring out what to offer, it's rarely because they don't have a skill. It's because they spent years offering it so freely that they've stopped seeing it as special. Let me ask you this. What do people always come to you for help with? It can be your friends, your family, your next door neighbor, your mom, that rogue Instagram friend that followed you by mistake one day. I know they know that you have value. I know that you get asked for help. So what is it? To make this feel real, let me give you a few of my own. When I was in Canada at work, people knew that I was kind of a Microsoft Office nerd. I loved writing PowerPoint presentations, which we called PowerPoint decks. But most of all, I loved me some good Excel action. So people would ask me to help them with their spreadsheets, the ones that they were building and the ones that had been built by others. I'd help them figure out how to build tables that could easily be sorted with the tap of a button, or create drop-down lists with static options to choose from so that there was no confusion with varying outputs. I helped them build tables that had formulae that allowed them to factor in variables from other sheets. You name it, I loved it. I had no idea that that was something that people on the outside of the public service saw a need for. Silly me. My family knew that I was good at organizing parties and food, so they'd ask me for my help with decorations or dishes or any other gathering-related thing. It pleased me to no end when they asked me to cook a specific dish. Food is definitely my top love language. I love feeding people. Little did I know that some people would have paid money for weekly deliveries of my ginger peach soup that I usually make for Thanksgiving. Also silly me. When I got here, naturally, government processes were not at all like the ones that I was used to implementing back in Canada, so I did what I always do. I went looking for answers. Sometimes I needed a little extra help from friends and family, but I was largely able to cope on my own. So when I met people who were new to the region and I overheard them expressing frustration and confusion over how things are done here, I'd most certainly rush to their side and explain things to the best of my ability. I began to keep myself informed on all of the latest adjustments to programs and policies regarding both immigration and business. Immigration because I was meeting so many people who were coming from away and looking for some answers to their immigration questions, but also about business because I wanted people to feel like they could lean on me for sound advice and support when it came to starting their own business. And lean they did. So I'll ask you again, what do people ask you for help with? That's your clue. That's your market research right there. Maybe you're really good at helping them organize their chaos. Maybe you too have a knack for translating bureaucracy into human language. Maybe you are excellent at curating beauty, creating peaceful spaces, or pulling together a look, or picking the perfect words to write in an email. Maybe you have the perfect eye and just the right touch with a shutter button to take exquisite family pictures. Or maybe you don't want to take family pictures at all, but instead you'd prefer to work with businesses to help them showcase their worth and their value. My great-grandmother was a legend in the kitchen. Family lore has it that all of the women in the neighborhood would flock to her house to ask her for her pie dough recipe or how she made her amazingly mouth-watering dates and nuts cake. She gave her time and knowledge generously because she loved to teach others her secrets, and she infused her passion in them at the same time. If she was still around today and she ran a business, I bet her business would be making sure no one ever went hungry. Often, women don't recognize their soft skills as something that others would pay for. Just because they're termed a soft skill doesn't make them insignificant or not worthy. As I said earlier, these are considered essential qualifications for jobs in the public service. Skills like listening, organizing, being the calm one in a storm are foundations of entire industries like coaching, consultancy, hospitality, event planning, design, caregiving, education. These are all built on things that women do every day with great comfort, ease, and joy, often in heels and with their eyes closed. I bet my great-grandmama would have been an amazing culinary consultant. I'm a seasoned cook and baker, and I would pay big money to be able to spend a day learning from her. Those kinds of skills and expertise are in demand, and they can form the foundation of an entire business. I've seen people turn kitchen hacks into meal planning and preparation, and then after a few years, they expanded into a full-on cooking show for a local TV network. I've seen natural listeners, those are the ones who always get the late night texts and phone calls, turn that gift into coaching offers. I've seen people who rocked their way around a Cricut machine parlay those talents into a party decor venture. And one thing is for certain, absolute certain, none of those initiatives started with a fancy schmancy business plan. It started with noticing that what they were already doing for free had value. In the book Feminine Capital, Barbara Orser talks about how women are more likely to create businesses that reflect purpose, community, and meaning over profit. And I'm sure that so many of you, like my great-grandma, would fit right into the business crowd because you're doing it for purpose, community, and meaning way before profit. Whether you're the spreadsheet whisperer, the party planner, or the calm in the chaos, unequivocally, there is something that you give without thinking. And that might just be where your next chapter begins. So now that you've got your offer semi-solidified, let's talk about that gut flip moment. The part where you could charge someone, but then your brain kicks into high gear and says, it wasn't a big deal. It only took me an hour. Or, yeah, it didn't feel like hard work. The reality here is that the thing that took you an hour might have taken someone else a week, and it took you a lifetime to get that good. We don't charge for the hour. We charge for the years that made that hour possible. And then there's another narrative that we come up with, and that's that I didn't get the outcome I wanted, so maybe I shouldn't charge at all. Let me share a story with you. And this is something that happened to me recently. I had a client who hired me to help her navigate the licensing process. I did what I always do. I billed her and I offered a standard 7-day grace period for payment, and I got straight to work. But the process didn't go smoothly or as expected. There were hiccups, and those hiccups were things that were outside anyone's control. The licensing system was experiencing some truly unfortunate glitches, and we were stuck. And I could feel her frustration. I understood it, and I took it on as my own. So I caved. After several weeks of trying to troubleshoot in vain, with crocodile tears in my eyes, I sat in my car feeling completely deflated and defeated, and I rescinded the invoice. I told myself that I hadn't delivered, that it reflected poorly on me, that ethically, I couldn't charge a fellow businesswoman for something she hadn't received. I felt conflicted, but I told myself that it was the right thing to do. Fast forward to a few days later, and I got a message from her while I was on vacation. She'd gotten her license. The glitches had resolved, and it all worked out. And my heart lifted for her. I was genuinely so happy. But also, the invoice was gone. The chance to honor my time, my effort, my emotional energy, that ship had sailed. And I sat with that feeling, not of shame, but more so recognition, that I had made the choice. And I'd made it from a place of doubt and not from a place of value. Because somewhere in me, I believed that if the result wasn't immediate or the results weren't favorable, then the work didn't count. But the thing is that I did do the work. I showed up in multiple ways, online, in person, by text, by phone. I stayed with her through it. And then also there was the invisible work. That's the kind that you don't see. You don't log into a timesheet. When your client is on your mind while you're cooking dinner, or when you're rehearsing how to word a follow-up email, or when you're strategizing on their behalf during your morning drive. It's also the weight of caring, not because you have to, but because you want the best outcome for your clients. That kind of emotional investment is a value add, and a grossly underestimated one, in my humble opinion. It's worth something. And yes, even when things don't go to plan, and in the end, even if the results didn't come in the expected time frame, it came just the same. So why am I pizzaing myself? You North Americans will understand, but for the rest of the world, that's when you order a pizza and when it doesn't arrive within 30 minutes, your delivery is free. When we discount and we undervalue or ignore our work's worth, we start to chip away at our own sustainability. And over time, that leads to resentment or burnout or both. So now, I hold that moment as a reminder. Not everything is instant. Not everything goes smoothly. And honestly, as a project manager with 20 years under my belt, this knowledge should be ingrained in my psyche hard. But the feelings are hard to control, right? Especially when you've got a bazillion other things pulling at your attention and your heartstrings at the same time. So I want to ask you, have you ever taken something off your invoice? Have you ever rescinded your invoice altogether? Or have you felt guilty about charging what you quoted, even though you showed up fully and genuinely hoped for a favorable outcome? Here's where things can get really tricky, because when we talk about pricing, especially as women, especially as service providers, especially when we care deeply, we tend to confuse our empathy with our ethics. Right? We think things like, they're just starting out. Maybe they can't afford it, so maybe I should just give them a break and not charge for it. Or if it felt easy to me, it must not be worth much. And this is one belief that I really struggle to divest myself from, and that is the mindset of, as a public servant, I cannot charge. Because when you work at the pleasure of the taxpayer, you can't accept gifts or payments for your services. You get a salary, and that's enough, which is totally fair. But here's the thing. I don't get a public service salary anymore. And yet, it's still really hard for me to divorce myself from that belief. Here's the thing that I'd like us to consider, though. Just because we're empathetic doesn't mean that we should undercharge. Just because our hearts are filled with kindness doesn't mean that we should be shattering our own boundaries. And just because we act with professionalism and decorum doesn't mean that everything we put out there will be perfect, right? Life would be pretty boring if everything was perfect. Here's another story. A few months ago, a client approached me to do some research for them. I was more than happy to oblige because the work was genuinely interesting and I love learning new things. So I had a meeting with them, and in the end, I was asked what my rates were. I shifted very uncomfortably in my seat and I said, my rates are 200 dirhams per hour. And what I should have done was just stop talking and leave it at that. But I was so very uncomfortable saying out loud what I valued my services at, and I was so afraid to lose the opportunity that I went on to say, almost in the same breath, but look, since I can turn around and use this knowledge to educate other clients, I'll give you a 50% discount. Seriously, Christy? I hope y'all are shaking your heads and wagging your fingers at me wherever you are. Because come on, I discounted myself before they even had the chance to see my full value. And trust, they knew my value, or they wouldn't have approached me with the confidence that I was the one to help them out in the first place. And maybe I would have offered a discount, but it would have felt a lot different if I had done it from a place of confidence and not fear. You can be a good person and run a fair, sustainable business at the same time. That includes pricing in a way that's reflective of your full value, not just the visible parts. So how do we actually begin to do that? How do we start setting prices that feel ethical and sustainable and aligned, whether we're offering a service or making a product, or coaching someone through their messy bits. That's where we'll go next week. Okay. All right, I hear you. I can hear some of you from here shaking your fists at the sky and yelling, Christy, just tell me what to charge. And listen, I get it, because you've hung through a long episode and you're still here. You deserve the goods. But I'm going to make you wait just a tiny bit longer, because we're about to get into the part where we talk really seriously, not just about numbers, but how they act as reflections of your boundaries that you set for yourself and others. So go top up your tea, stretch your legs, shake your fists again, yell into your pillow, and I will see you back here for part 2 next week. Until then, please keep moving forward one messy step at a time. Bye, everyone.